I don't know when I stopped feeling the hunger. It wasn't a sudden thing, like a switch flipping off. It was slower, crueler, like my body had given up begging for what it knew wouldn't come. My name is Eliza, and for weeks, my own family kept me locked in that damp, freezing attic, feeding me scraps when they remembered I existed. My crime? I dared to ask questions. I dared to dig into the secrets they buried beneath their polished smiles and Sunday dinners. They thought they could break me, starve me into silence. But they didn't know the fire that burned inside me, a fire that would one day burn their world to ash. It started with a letter. I found it tucked inside an old book in my father's study, a room we were never allowed to enter. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged, but the words were clear enough to stop my heart. It was a confession, written in my mother's trembling hand, detailing how she and my father had framed my uncle for a crime he didn't commit. Embezzlement, they said. A scandal that tore our family apart and sent Uncle Thomas to prison for 15 years. I was just a child when it happened, too young to understand why he stopped coming to our house, why his name became a curse. But that letter changed everything. It was proof of their betrayal, proof that my parents weren't the saints they pretended to be. I confronted them that night. We were sitting at the dinner table, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound. My brother, Caleb, was there too, his eyes fixed on his food, always the obedient son. I slid the letter across the table, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "Why did you do it?" I asked. My mother's face went white, her fork frozen mid-air. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. "You don't know what you're talking about, Eliza," he said, his voice low. "Dangerous." But I pushed harder. "Uncle Thomas is innocent. You ruined his life." That's when I saw a flicker of fear in their eyes, quickly replaced by something darker. They didn't deny it. They didn't explain. Instead, they locked me in the attic that same night. "For your own good," my mother whispered through the door, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite guilt. The lock clicked, and I was alone. The attic was a prison of splintered wood and cobwebs, with a single window too small to climb through. They brought me water and crusts of bread, sometimes a bruised apple, but never enough. Days blurred into weeks, and the hunger became a living thing, clawing at my insides. I scratched tally marks into the floorboards, counting the days, promising myself I'd survive. I had to. For Uncle Thomas. For justice. Caleb was the one who brought the food most days. My little brother, barely 20, with his soft brown eyes and nervous hands. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak. "Caleb," I'd whisper through the door, "you know this is wrong. Help me." But he'd just set the tray down and leave, his footsteps fading down the stairs. I didn't hate him for it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. He was trapped too, in his own way, caught in the web of our parents' lies. They'd raised him to obey, to never question, and he was too afraid to break free. The attic was cold, but my anger kept me warm. I spent hours planning, dreaming of the day I'd escape and expose them. I'd seen the headlines in my mind, "Local family's dark secret revealed." I'd make sure the world knew what they'd done, not just to me, but to Uncle Thomas, to our family's name. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I knew I would. I had to believe that, or the hunger and the darkness would win. One night, I heard them arguing downstairs. Their voices carried through the floorboards, sharp and frantic. "She knows too much," my father hissed. "We can't keep her up there forever." My mother's voice was softer, pleading. "She's our daughter, Richard. We can't, we can." He cut her off. "And we will." My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to keep me locked away. They were planning something worse. I didn't know what, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to get out. The window was my only hope. It was small, barely a foot wide, but I'd been wasting away for weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I could fit. I waited until the house was silent, the clock downstairs chiming midnight. I used a rusted nail I'd found under the floorboards to pry the window frame loose. The wood groaned, but it gave way. I pushed my body through, inch by agonizing inch, the sharp edges scraping my skin. I didn't care. Freedom was on the other side. When I finally tumbled onto the roof, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I was weak, dizzy, but alive. I slid down the shingles, my bare feet scraping against the rough surface, and dropped into the backyard. The world spun, but I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The letter was still in my pocket, crumpled but intact. It was my weapon, my proof, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. I made it to the edge of town before I collapsed, my legs giving out under me. A passing truck driver found me, his headlights catching my pale face in the darkness. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I could barely speak, but I managed to choke out, "Help me." He took me to a diner, bought me coffee and a plate of eggs. I told him everything, not the whole story. Not yet, but enough. He listened, his face growing grim. "You need to go to the police," he said. I nodded, clutching the letter like a lifeline. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and questions. I told them about the attic, the starvation, the letter. They didn't believe me at first, not until I showed them the confession. Not until they saw the bruises on my arms, the hollows in my cheeks. They brought my parents in for questioning that same night. I sat in a cold metal chair, watching through a one-way mirror as my mother cried and my father stared at the wall, his face unreadable. Caleb wasn't there. I didn't know where he was, and that scared me more than anything. The story broke the next morning. A local reporter got wind of it, and by noon, my family's name was plastered across every news outlet in the state. Prominent family accused of imprisoning daughter. Framing relative. I watched the headlines from a hospital bed, and 4 dripping fluids into my arm. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was empty. The truth was out. But what did it cost? My family was shattered. My brother was missing, and I was alone. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. The truth had set me free, but it had also set something else loose, something dark and vengeful that I wasn't ready to face. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the machines keeping time with my thoughts. The letter was safe now, locked in a police evidence bag. But its words haunted me. My mother's handwriting, so neat and deliberate, confessing to a crime that destroyed a man's life. I wondered if she'd written it out of guilt or fear, or if it was just another lie meant to protect herself. I didn't know what to believe anymore, only that I'd survived. And that survival came with a weight I hadn't expected. The police came every day, their questions relentless. "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" they asked, as if I'd had a choice. "How did you find the letter?" I told them the truth, every detail, until my throat was raw and my heart ached. They were building a case, they said, not just against my parents but against the whole web of deceit they'd spun. Uncle Thomas's conviction was being re-examined. His name dragged back into the light after years of being buried. I wanted to see him, to tell him I'd fought for him. But he was still in prison, miles away, waiting for a hearing that might never come. The news crews camped outside the hospital, their cameras hungry for a glimpse of me. I was the girl who'd escaped, the victim turned avenger, and they wanted my story. I didn't give it to them. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face the world, to let them see the cracks in my soul. Instead, I watched the reports on the grainy hospital TV, my parents' faces flashing across the screen. My mother looked broken, her eyes red from crying. My father was stone-faced, his lawyer whispering in his ear. They hadn't been charged yet, but the public had already convicted them. Caleb was still missing. That was the part that gnawed at me, kept me awake at night. I'd heard nothing from him. Not a call. Not a whisper. The police said he'd left the house the night I escaped. His car found abandoned at a gas station on the edge of town. I didn't know if he was running from our parents or from me. I wanted to believe he was out there, trying to make things right. But a darker thought crept in. What if he was just like them? What if he'd known all along and done nothing? A social worker named Maria came to see me on the third day. She was kind, her voice soft but firm, like she'd seen too many broken families to be surprised by mine. "You're strong, Eliza," she said, sitting by my bed. "But you don't have to do this alone." I wanted to laugh. Alone was all I'd ever been, even before the attic. My parents had always been distant, their love conditional on my silence, my obedience. Caleb had been my only ally, and now he was gone. Maria gave me her card, told me to call if I needed to talk. I tucked it under my pillow, knowing I wouldn't. When they released me from the hospital, I had nowhere to go. Our house was a crime scene now, taped off and crawling with investigators. I stayed in a motel paid for by the state, a dingy place with thin walls and a flickering neon sign. I kept the TV on, the noise drowning out the silence in my head. The story was spreading, going national. Talk shows dissected my parents' lives, their wealth, their charity work, all a facade for the rot beneath. I felt a strange pride in that, knowing I'd torn down their lies, but it was tainted by guilt. I destroyed my family. Was that justice? Or was it revenge? I started getting letters. Strangers sent them to the motel, their words scrawled in messy handwriting or typed on crisp paper. Some called me a hero, others a traitor. One letter, and signed, chilled me to the bone. "You think you've won, but you've only made things worse." I showed it to the police, but they said it was probably just a crank, someone caught up in the media frenzy. I wasn't so sure. The words felt personal. Like they knew me. Like they were watching. I needed answers. So I started digging. The motel had a computer in the lobby. Ancient but functional. I searched for anything about Uncle Thomas's case. Piecing together the fragments of a story I'd never been told. He'd been a partner in my father's company. A rising star until the embezzlement charges came. The evidence had been airtight bank records. Emails. Witnesses all fabricated. I now knew. By my parents. But why? What had he done to make them hate him so much? I found an old article from the trial. Buried in an online archive. It mentioned a disagreement between Thomas and my father. Something about the company's finances. Thomas had wanted to go public with information. But my father refused. The article didn't say what the information was. But I could guess. My parents had been hiding something. Something big enough to ruin a man's life to keep secret. I needed to know more. But the trail was cold. And I was no detective. That's when I got the call. It was late. The motel room dark except for the glow of the TV. The voice on the other end was low. Familiar. But I couldn't place it at first. Eliza, he said. You need to stop. My heart stopped. Caleb. I whispered. There was a pause. Then a click. The line went dead. I sat there. The phone still in my hand. My mind racing. It was him. I was sure of it. But why was he hiding? And why was he warning me? I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying his voice. The fear in it. The urgency. Caleb knew something. Something he was too scared to tell me. I had to find him. Not just for him. But for me. He was the only family I had left. The only piece of my past that wasn't poisoned. But finding him meant going back to the house. Back to the place where it all began. The thought made my stomach twist. But I had no choice. The truth was there. Waiting. And I was done running. The house loomed at the end of the street. Its windows dark. The yellow police tape fluttering in the wind. I stood across the road. My breath visible in the cold night air. My heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I hadn't been back since the night I'd crawled out of that attic. And every instinct screamed at me to turn around. To run and never look back. But Caleb's voice on the phone kept me anchored. He was out there. And this house held the answers. I pulled my jacket tighter and crossed the street. My footsteps silent on the pavement. The back door was unlocked. The lock broken from the police search. I slipped inside. The familiar smell of wood polish and lavender hitting me like a memory I didn't want. The kitchen was a mess, drawers pulled out. Papers scattered across the counter. The police had been thorough. But they hadn't found what I was looking for. I didn't even know what it was. Only that it was here. Hidden in the walls of this perfect, poisoned house. I moved through the rooms like a ghost. My flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The living room was untouched. The furniture still arranged like we were about to sit down for dinner. I could almost hear my mother's voice, calling me to set the table. My father's laughter as he poured himself another glass of wine. It was a lie. All of it. But it still hurt to see it frozen in time. I climbed the stairs. Each creak of the wood a reminder of the nights I'd lain awake in the attic. Listening to the house breathe. The attic door was still locked. I didn't have a key. But I didn't need one. I'd learned a few things in those weeks of captivity. like how to listen to the house, how to feel its weaknesses. I kicked the door hard, the wood splintering under my weight. It gave way with a groan, and I stepped into the darkness. The air was thick with dust, the tally marks I'd scratched into the floorboards still visible. I knelt beside them, my fingers tracing the lines. Each one was a day I'd survived, promise I'd made to myself. I searched the attic for hours, pulling up loose floorboards, checking the walls for hidden compartments. I found nothing but cobwebs and memories. I was about to give up when I noticed the window, the one I'd escaped through. The frame was loose, the nails rusted. I pried it open again, my hands shaking, and reached into the gap between the wood and the wall. My fingers brushed against something cold, metallic. A small box, no bigger than a book, hidden where no one would think to look. Inside was a USB drive and a notebook, its pages filled with my father's handwriting. I flipped through it, my heart racing. Dates, names, numbers, transactions, payoffs, people I didn't know but whose names carried weight. It was a ledger, a record of everything my parents had done to build their empire. Embezzlement was just the tip of it. There were bribes, threats, even hints of something darker. I didn't understand it all, but I knew it was enough to bury them. The USB drive was heavier in my hand, its contents a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I took the box and slipped back downstairs, my mind buzzing with what I'd found. I was halfway to the door when I heard Ida creak from the living room. I froze, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. No answer, but the air felt different, heavier. I moved toward the sound, my pulse hammering in my ears. The living room was empty, but the curtains swayed slightly, like someone had just brushed past them. "Caleb," I whispered, hoping, praying it was him. Silence. I backed toward the door, clutching the box to my chest. Whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen, but I felt their presence, a shadow just out of reach. I didn't wait to find out more. I ran, the cold air stinging my lungs as I sprinted back to the motel. Back in my room, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. My hands were still shaking as I plugged the USB drive into the motel's computer. The screen lit up with files, documents, emails, even audio recordings. I clicked on one, my father's voice filling the room. "If Thomas talks, we're done," he said, his tone clipped. Urgent. "We need to make sure he never does." Another voice, unfamiliar, replied, "I'll handle it." My stomach churned. This wasn't just about framing my uncle. They'd planned to silence him permanently. The notebook was worse. It named people who'd been paid off: judges, cops, even a journalist who'd tried to dig into the story years ago. My parents had built a fortress of lies, and I'd been living inside it my whole life. I felt sick, betrayed, but also alive with purpose. This was the proof I needed, not just to free Uncle Thomas, but to make sure my parents faced justice. I called Maria, the social worker. She answered on the first ring, her voice calm but concerned. "Eliza, it's late. Are you okay?" I told her about the box, the USB drive, the notebook. I didn't trust the police, not after seeing those names in the ledger. I need to get this to someone who can't be bought, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then gave me a name: a reporter named Sarah Klein, known for taking down corrupt officials. She's in Chicago, Maria said. I'll get you her number. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the box under my pillow, the USB drive in my pocket. I didn't know who was watching, who'd been in the house, but I knew I wasn't safe. Caleb's warning echoed in my head. You need to stop. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was so close. The next morning, I called Sarah Klein. She listened to my story, her voice sharp and professional. Can you get to Chicago? She asked. I need to see what you've got. I didn't have money, didn't have a car, but I had the truth. I'll find a way, I said. I didn't know how, but I would. For Uncle Thomas. For Caleb. For the girl who'd survived the attic. The bus to Chicago smelled of stale coffee and despair. I sat in the back, the box tucked inside my backpack, my eyes scanning every passenger who boarded. I didn't know who I was looking for, only that I felt watched, like the shadow from the house had followed me. The USB drive burned a hole in my pocket, its weight a reminder of the secrets I carried. I hadn't eaten since the motel, but hunger was an old friend now, one I could ignore. Chicago was a beast of a city, all noise and movement, so different from the suffocating quiet of my hometown. I found Sarah Klein's office in a rundown building near the river, the kind of place where dreams went to die. She was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air. You're Eliza, she said. Not a question. I nodded, clutching my backpack. Show me, she said. And I did. We spent hours going through the files. Sarah's face grew darker with each document, each recording. This is bigger than I thought, she said, leaning back in her chair. Your parents weren't just covering their tracks. They were part of something, organized. She didn't say cartel or mafia, but the words hung in the air. I felt a chill, realizing the scope of what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about power, money, and blood. Sarah wanted to publish the story immediately, but I hesitated. What about Caleb? I asked. He's out there, and he's scared. If this goes public, what happens to him? She looked at me, her eyes softening for the first time. You love your brother, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat tight. Then we'll find him first, she said. But we need to move fast. People like your parents don't sit still when their secrets are out. She had contacts: private investigators, ex-cops, people who knew how to find someone who didn't want to be found. One of them, a grizzled man named Jack, agreed to help. He didn't ask for details, just took a photo of Caleb I'd brought from the motel and promised to start looking. He's a good kid, I told Jack, my voice breaking. He's just lost. Jack nodded, his face unreadable. We'll find him, kid. While Jack searched, Sarah and I worked on the story. She taught me how to organize the evidence, how to build a narrative that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a partner, a voice. Felt good, like I was taking back something they'd stolen from me. But every night, I lay awake in the safe house Sarah had arranged, wondering where Caleb was, what he was running from. A week later, Jack called. "Got a lead," he said. "Your brother's been spotted in a small town in Indiana, working at a diner under a fake name." My heart leapt, but Jack's voice was grim. "He's not alone. Someone's watching him. Could be your parents' people." I felt sick. My parents had reach, connections I hadn't even begun to understand. If they were after Caleb, he was in more danger than I'd thought. Sarah didn't want me to go. "It's not safe," she said, her voice firm. "Let Jack handle it." But I couldn't. Caleb was my brother, my responsibility. I'd failed him by not seeing the truth sooner, by not protecting him from our parents' poison. I had to go to him, to bring him back. Sarah sighed, seeing the look in my eyes. "Fine," she said. "But I'm coming with you." The drive to Indiana was tense, the road stretching out like a thread connecting me to Caleb. Sarah drove, her hands steady on the wheel, while I stared out the window, the box in my lap. I hadn't let it out of my sight since I'd found it, afraid it would disappear, afraid I'd lose the only thing keeping me grounded. Jack met us at a gas station outside the town, his face etched with worry. "He's at the diner," he said. "But we need to be careful. Whoever's watching him is good. Professional." The diner was a relic, all chrome and faded red booths. I saw Caleb before he saw me, his head bowed over a coffee pot, his hands moving with the same nervous energy I remembered. He looked thinner, his eyes shadowed, but it was him, my brother. I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him, but Jack held me back. "Not yet," he whispered. "We need to know who's watching." We sat in a booth, pretending to be customers. Sarah ordered coffee, her eyes scanning the room. I couldn't take my eyes off Caleb. He hadn't seen me yet, hadn't noticed the way my hands shook as I gripped my menu. Then I saw him, the man in the corner, his face half hidden by a newspaper. He wasn't reading. He was watching Caleb, his eyes cold and calculating. Jack noticed him too. "That's our guy," he muttered. "Stay here." Jack moved toward the man, casual but deliberate. I don't know what he said, but the man stood, his movements quick, and slipped out the back door. Jack followed, leaving Sarah and me alone. I couldn't wait anymore. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked toward Caleb. He looked up, his eyes widening. "Eliza," he whispered, like he couldn't believe I was real. "Caleb," I said, my voice breaking. "We need to talk." He glanced around, fear flickering in his eyes. "Not here," he said. "It's not safe." He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the kitchen. Sarah followed, her hand on her phone, ready to call Jack. We didn't make it far. The back door swung open, and the man from the corner was there, his eyes locked on us. He wasn't alone. The man's shadow fell across the kitchen floor, his presence filling the cramped space with menace. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face unreadable but his eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. Behind him stood another figure, Smaller, cloaked in a hoodie, their face hidden. Caleb's grip on my arm tightened, his breath shallow. "Eliza, run," he whispered, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, the box in my backpack a weight pulling me down. Sarah stepped forward, her phone still in her hand, her voice steady. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man didn't answer, just tilted his head, like he was amused. The second figure stepped into the light, and my heart stopped. It was my mother. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, but it was her. The woman who'd locked me in the attic, who'd whispered "for your own good" through the door. She looked at me, her lips trembling, but there was no apology in her eyes, only desperation. "Eliza," she said, her voice a jagged edge. "Give us the box." I backed away, clutching my backpack. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You don't get to win this time." Caleb was shaking now, his eyes darting between me and our mother. I could see the war in him, the loyalty he'd been taught battling the truth he couldn't ignore. "Caleb," I said, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to be like them." The man moved faster than I expected, lunging toward me. Sarah shoved me aside, her phone clattering to the floor as she tried to block him. He grabbed her, pinning her against the wall with a force that made me flinch. Caleb shouted, "Stop!" But the man didn't listen. My mother stepped closer, her hands outstretched. "Eliza, please," she said. "You don't understand what's at stake." I didn't want to hear her lies. I turned and ran, dodging through the kitchen, my heart pounding. I heard Caleb's voice behind me, calling my name, but I didn't stop. The back door led to an alley, dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of garbage. I ran until my lungs burned, the box banging against my back. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep the evidence safe. I found a payphone at the edge of town, rusted but working. I called Jack, my hands shaking as I dialed. "They're here," I gasped when he answered. "My mother. Some guy. They're after us." Jack's voice was calm, professional. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." I gave him the address, then crouched behind a dumpster, my breath ragged. I didn't know if Caleb had followed, if he was with them or against them. I wanted to believe he was still my brother, but doubt was a poison I couldn't shake. Jack found me 20 minutes later, his car pulling up with a screech. Sarah was with him, a bruise blooming on her cheek but her eyes fierce. "We lost them," she said, climbing out. "But they'll be back." I handed Jack the box, my hands trembling. "This is everything," I said. "Don't let them get it." He nodded, tucking it into his jacket. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "Both of you." We drove to a safe house outside the city, a small cabin hidden in the woods. It was sparse but secure, with bars on the windows and a heavy lock on the door. Sarah and I sat at a rickety table, going through the files again while Jack stood guard. The USB drive had more than I'd realized: recordings of meetings, encrypted emails, even a video of my father shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, their faces grim. "This is enough to take down half the city," Sarah said, her voice low. But it's dangerous. People will kill to keep this quiet. I thought about Caleb. About the fear in his eyes. My brother, I said. He's still out there. He warned me to stop. Why would he do that if he was with them? Sarah didn't answer. Just looked at me with something like pity. Sometimes people get caught in the middle, she said. He might not know what side he's on. That night, I dreamed of the attic. The walls closed in, the air thick with dust and despair. I woke up screaming, my hands clawing at the blankets. Sarah was there, her hand on my shoulder. You're safe, she said, but I didn't feel it. Safety was an illusion, one my parents had taught me to believe in. I checked the USB drive, still in my pocket, and the notebook, hidden under my pillow. They were my anchors, the only things keeping me from falling apart. The next morning, Jack got a call. His face went pale as he listened. Then he turned to me. They found Caleb, he said. He's in a hospital in Ohio. Car accident. He's alive, but it's bad. My heart sank. I need to see him, I said, already grabbing my coat. Sarah tried to stop me, but Jack shook his head. Let her go, he said. She needs this. The hospital was a maze of white walls and beeping machines. Caleb was in the ICU, tubes snaking from his arms, his face bruised and swollen. I sat by his bed, my hand hovering over his, afraid to touch him. I'm sorry, I whispered. I should have protected you. His eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. Eliza, he croaked. I tried to warn you. Warn me about what? I asked, leaning closer. His voice was barely a whisper. They're coming. They know where you are. Fear gripped me, but I pushed it down. Who's coming? Caleb. Who's with Mom? He didn't answer, his eyes closing again. The machines beeped steadily, but each sound felt like a countdown. I called Sarah from the hospital, my voice shaking. We need to move, I said. They're coming for us. She didn't ask questions, just told me to stay put until she and Jack could get there. I sat by Caleb's bed, the USB drive in my hand, my mind racing. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they were dangerous. And I knew I couldn't run forever. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on Caleb's face. I sat there, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile thread tying him to life. The USB drive was a cold weight in my pocket, the notebook hidden in my bag. I didn't know who was coming, but Caleb's warning echoed in my head, a drumbeat of fear. I wanted to shake him awake, to demand answers, but he was too weak, too broken. I failed him once. I wouldn't again. Sarah and Jack arrived an hour later, their faces grim. We need to go, Sarah said, her voice low. Jack's got a place, off the grid. We can lay low until we figure out our next move. I didn't want to leave Caleb, but I knew she was right. Staying here was like painting a target on my back. I kissed Caleb's forehead, my lips trembling. I'll come back for you, I whispered, hoping he could hear me. The drive was silent, the road stretching into the darkness. Jack's place was a cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest and silence. It was smaller than the last one, with a single room and a cot in the corner. Sarah set up her laptop, transferring the files from the USB drive to a secure server. "If anything happens to us," she said, "this goes public automatically." I nodded, but the thought of anything happening made my stomach twist. We spent the next day planning. Sarah wanted to publish the story, to blow the lid off my parents' empire before they could silence us. Jack wasn't so sure. "These people don't play games," he said, cleaning a gun I hadn't noticed before. "You publish now. You're starting a war." I didn't know what to do. The evidence was damning, but it was also a weapon, one that could hurt more than just my parents. I thought about Caleb, about Uncle Thomas, about the lives already ruined. Was I ready to pull the trigger? That night, couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring into the woods, the darkness pressing against the glass. I kept seeing my mother's face in the diner, her desperation, her fear. She wasn't the woman I'd known growing up, the one who'd tucked me in and read me stories. That woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I wondered if she'd ever loved me, or if I'd just been another piece in her game. The next morning, Jack got another call. His face hardened as he listened. Then he turned to me. "Your uncle's hearing is tomorrow," he said. "They're letting him out. The evidence you gave the police, it's enough to overturn his conviction." Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. "Your parents are out on bail," he added. "They're looking for you." I felt the walls closing in, just like the attic. I couldn't run forever, but I couldn't fight them alone either. Sarah had an idea. "We go public," she said. "Not just the story, but you. Tell your story. Eliza. Your voice is stronger than any evidence." I didn't want to. The thought of facing cameras, of baring my soul to the world, made me sick. But I thought about Caleb, about Uncle Thomas, about the girl who'd scratched tally marks into the floorboards. She deserved to be heard. Sarah arranged an interview with a national news outlet, one she trusted. We drove to Chicago under cover of darkness, Jack's gun never far from his hand. The studio was a blur of lights and noise, people rushing around with clipboards and headsets. The reporter, a woman named Claire, was kind but direct. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked. I wasn't, but I nodded. "Let's do it." The interview was live, broadcast to millions. I sat under the hot lights, my hands clasped to keep them from shaking. Claire asked about the attic, about the starvation, about the letter. I told her everything, my voice steady even as my heart raced. I talked about Uncle Thomas, about how my parents had framed him to protect their secrets. I talked about Caleb, about how he was caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and truth. I didn't mention the USB drive or the notebook. Not yet. Those were for the courts. When it was over, I felt drained, like I'd left pieces of myself on that stage. But I also felt free. The world knew now. There was no going back. Sarah hugged me, her eyes shining. "You did it," she said. "You're unstoppable." I wanted to believe her, but I knew it wasn't over. My parents were still out there, and they weren't the kind to give up. We went back to the cabin, the air heavy with anticipation. Jack stayed outside, his eyes scanning the trees. Sarah monitored the news, the story spreading like wildfire. My parents' faces were everywhere, their lies exposed for the world to see. But there was still no word from Caleb, and that silence was louder than any headline. Late that night, Jack burst through the door, his face pale. "We've got company," he said, grabbing his gun. I heard it then, the crunch of tires on gravel, the low hum of an engine. Sarah pulled me toward the back of the cabin, her hand tight on mine. "Stay low," she whispered. I clutched the USB drive, my heart pounding. Whoever was out there, they weren't here to talk. The door crashed open, and I saw Himmy father. His face was twisted with rage, a gun in his hand. "Eliza," he said, his voice cold. "You've gone too far." Behind him stood the man from the diner, his eyes gleaming with malice. I didn't see my mother, but I felt her absence, like a wound. Sarah stepped in front of me, her voice steady. "You're not touching her." My father laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you can stop me?" he said. "You have no idea what you've started." I wanted to scream, to run, but I stood my ground. I'd survived the attic. I'd survived them. I wasn't going to let them win now. The cabin felt, his gun a dark promise in his hand. The man from the diner flanked him, his presence a silent threat. Sarah's grip on my arm was tight, her body a shield between me and them. Jack was nowhere to be seen, and that scared me more than the gun. I clutched the USB drive, its edges digging into my palm. This was the moment I'd been running toward, or from, since the attic. "You've made a mess, Eliza," my father said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "You think you're a hero, but you're just a stupid girl who doesn't know when to stop." His words cut, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse in the attic, in the silence of my own head. "Where's Mom?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. His eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She wasn't here. That meant something, but I didn't know what. "Give me the box," he said, stepping closer. Sarah pushed me back, her voice sharp. "Back off, Richard. The world knows what you've done. You're finished." He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the small room. "The world," he said. "You think a few headlines will stop me? I've got friends. Eliza. People who make problems disappear." The man beside him smirked, his hand resting on his own gun. I heard a noise outside, a rustle, then a thud. My father didn't react, but the other man's head snapped toward the window. That's when Jack appeared, silent as a shadow, his gun trained on the man from the diner. "Drop it," Jack said, his voice low. "Dangerous." The man hesitated, then complied, his gun clattering to the floor. My father's face twisted with rage, but he didn't lower his weapon. "You're out of your depth, Eliza," he said. "You have no idea what you're up against." "Then tell me," I said. stepping out from behind Sarah. Tell me why you framed Uncle Thomas. Tell me what you're hiding. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he lunged, grabbing me before Sarah or Jack could react. The gun pressed against my temple, cold and unyielding. Sarah screamed, but Jack held his ground, his gun still on the other man. Let her go, Richard, Jack said. This doesn't end well for you. My father's breath was hot against my ear. You should have stayed in the attic. He whispered. You should have stayed quiet. I felt the fear, but it was drowned out by something stronger, anger, burning through me like fire. I'm not that girl anymore, I said, my voice shaking but clear. You can't silence me. The standoff felt like it lasted hours, though it was probably seconds. Then I heard her voice, me mother's, trembling but unmistakable. Richard, stop. She stepped into the doorway, her face pale, her hands shaking. This has to end. My father's grip tightened, the gun digging into my skin. You're weak, Helen. He spat. You always were. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were on me, filled with something I hadn't seen in years, regret. Eliza, she said. I'm sorry. I didn't want this. I wanted to believe her, but the memory of the attic, of her voice through the door, kept me cold. Then help me, I said. Make this right. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping closer. Let her go, Richard, she said. It's over. He laughed, but it was desperate now, the sound of a man losing control. You think you can betray me too, he said, turning the gun on her. That was his mistake. Jack moved, faster than I'd thought possible, tackling my father to the ground. The gun went off, the sound deafening, but the bullet hit the ceiling, showering us with plaster. Sarah pulled me away, her arms around me as Jack wrestled the gun from my father's hand. The man from the diner tried to run, but my mother blocked the door, her small frame surprisingly steady. No more, she said, her voice breaking. No more lies. Jack restrained my father, cuffing his hands with zip ties from his pocket. The other man was next, his face a mask of resignation. My mother sank to the floor, her head in her hands, sobbing. I didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, pity, they all swirled together. A storm I couldn't navigate. Sarah knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder. You're okay, she said. But I wasn't. Not yet. I looked at my mother, at the woman who'd failed me, who'd locked me away. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer, just kept crying, her tears pooling on the floor. Jack called the police, and soon the cabin was filled with flashing lights and uniforms. My father was taken away, his eyes burning with hatred as he glared at me. The other man went quietly, his head bowed. My mother was questioned, her hands cuffed but her face calm, like she'd finally let go of something heavy. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive her, but I saw something in her eyes that night, something human, something broken. Sarah drove me back to the hospital to check on Caleb. He was awake when I got there, his eyes clearer, his voice stronger. Eliza, he said, reaching for my hand. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop them. I squeezed his hand, tears burning my eyes. You're here now, I said. That's enough. The story broke the next day, bigger than before. Sarah's article, backed by the evidence from the USB drive and notebook, named names politicians, businessmen, even a few cops. The nation was riveted, the headlines screaming about corruption and betrayal. Uncle Thomas was released that week, his conviction overturned. I met him outside the prison, a man I barely remembered, his face lined but his eyes kind. You did this, he said, hugging me. You saved me. I didn't feel like a savior. I felt like a girl who'd lost everything to find the truth. The weeks that followed were a blur of courtrooms and cameras. My parents' trial was a spectacle. Every detail of their crimes laid bare for the world to see. I testified, my voice steady as I recounted the attic, the starvation, the letter that started it all. My mother cried through most of it, her head bowed, while my father stared straight ahead, his face a mask. The jury didn't take long to decide. Guilty on all counts: false imprisonment, conspiracy, fraud. The judge's gavel was a thunderclap, sealing their fate. Caleb was there, in a wheelchair, still recovering from the accident. He didn't testify, but he sat by me every day, his hand in mine. We didn't talk much about what happened, about the years we'd spent under our parents' shadow. Some things didn't need words. He was my brother, and that was enough. Uncle Thomas came too, his presence a quiet strength. He didn't speak of the years he'd lost, but I saw the weight of them in his eyes. You gave me my life back, he told me after the trial. I wanted to believe him, but I knew the truth had cost us all something we'd never get back. Sarah's article won awards, but she didn't care about the fame. She stayed by my side, helping me navigate the media storm, the endless questions. You're more than your story, she told me one night, over coffee in a diner not unlike the one where I'd found Caleb. You're Eliza. Don't forget that. I tried to hold onto her words, to find the girl I'd been before the attic, before the lies. She was still there, somewhere, buried under the scars. I moved to Chicago, started over in a small apartment with a view of the river. Caleb came with me, and we learned to be a family again, just the two of us. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I woke up screaming, the attic walls closing in. There were days when Caleb's silence felt like a wall between us. But we talked, slowly, piecing together the fragments of our lives. He told me about the diner, about how he'd run because he was afraid, not of me, but of what our parents might do. I wanted to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. I just didn't know how. I visited my mother in prison once. She looked small behind the glass, her hands folded like she was praying. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice muffled by the phone. I didn't know if I believed her, but I listened. She talked about fear, about how she'd been trapped in my father's world, too weak to fight back. I'm sorry, she said, over and over, until the words lost meaning. I didn't forgive her, not then, but I didn't hate her either. Hate was too heavy to carry. Uncle Thomas rebuilt his life too, starting a small business, living quietly. He called me every week, his voice warm, like a father's should be. "You're stronger than you know," he'd say, and I'd smile, even though I didn't always believe it. Strength wasn't something I felt. It was something I did, one day at a time. The USB drive and notebook were entered as evidence, their contents dismantling a network of corruption that reached farther than I'd imagined. People went to jail, politicians, CEOs, even the man from the diner, who turned out to be a hired fixer. The headlines faded eventually, replaced by new scandals, new stories. But I didn't forget. Couldn't. I started writing, not for the papers, but for myself. A journal. First, then stories, pouring out the pain and the hope in equal measure. Sarah read them, her eyes bright with pride. "You've got a voice," she said. "Use it." I wasn't sure I was ready, but I kept writing, each word a step toward healing. One day, I got a letter. No return address, just my name in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sentence: "You did what I couldn't." It wasn't signed, but I knew it was from my mother. I didn't keep it, didn't frame it or burn it. I let it go, like I was learning to let go of so many things. Caleb and I went to the lake one evening, the water calm under a pink sky. We didn't talk about the trial, or the attic, or the years we'd lost. We just sat there, the silence between us soft, not heavy. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice quiet but sure. I nodded, feeling the truth of it for the first time. We weren't whole, not yet, but we were here, together, and that was enough. I looked out at the water, the ripples catching the last light of the day. I thought about the girl in the attic, the one who'd scratched tally marks into the floorboards, who'd promised herself she'd survive. She was still with me, but she wasn't alone anymore. I found my voice, my truth, and I'd used it to tear down the lies that had held us captive. Justice wasn't a clean victory. It was messy, painful, but it was mine. And as the sun sank below the horizon, I felt something Nawa spark of redemption, not just for me, but for all of us who'd fought to be free.